Welcome to today's webcast, From Hype to Value, Robotic Process Automation, sponsored by Huron Consulting Group. I'm Jess Bozzo, and I'll be your MC. Before we get started, I'll cover a few features of the console. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view slides and polling questions during the webcast. If you're interested, Huron will be distributing a white paper that addresses the key elements of today's presentation. You'll also see a poll question at the end of today's webcast. Please let us know if you'd like to receive a copy. We invite you to ask questions at any time during today's webcast in the Q&A area of your console. We've set aside some time to address your questions following today's presentation. You'll also have the opportunity to earn a certificate for 1 CPE credit. To be eligible, you must respond to at least 3 polling questions that we'll have throughout the webcast, as well as remain on the line for the duration of today's webcast. Afterwards, if you're eligible to receive credit, you'll be able to click on an icon to download the certificate located in the certification section. Now, without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome today's featured speaker, Mark Schlegel, Director with Huron Consulting Group. Mark is a director and leader in Huron's Intelligent Automation service offering. He has provided consulting services to national and multinational clients across multiple industry sectors over the past 20 years, while in leadership roles with firms such as Deloitte and A.T. Kearney. If you're interested in contacting Mark, you can find some contact information on this slide and again at the end of today's webcast. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to Mark to start us off. Welcome, Mark. Over to you.
Thank you kindly, Jessica. Really appreciate it. What a great topic to be sharing with you today. I'm totally thrilled to have the opportunity to get into dialogue with many of you, and I'm hoping that you'll find it to be a great use of an hour of your time. Briefly speaking about Huron Consulting, we're a full services consulting firm. We're a publicly traded organization, so you can find out more information about us if you're interested online. And in addition to that, I want you to be aware that we work with our clients on strategy through implementation and delivery across many industry practices. That's the only part of the commercial message for Huron. Otherwise, I'd love the chance now to get into the session with you. Our objectives for today are, number one, to provide you with an overview of RPA and some of the key concepts. Number two, to illustrate some use cases where RPA is particularly practical, and mention some of what might be considered critical success factors for capturing the value of RPA and related solutions. And finally, to inspire thoughtful investment by you and your organizations as you look to drive improvement in your business and enhance the opportunities for your employees to develop throughout their careers. So we put together an agenda that will allow us to dig in there. 2 main parts before we hit Q&A at the end. Number one, we'll provide that RPA overview, a few definitions, talk about what we call moving beyond the hype cycle of RPA, and talk a little bit about RPA in the broader context of intelligent automation solutions and tools. And finally, in this first half of the presentation, we'll talk about some focused areas for application of robotic process automation in what we call heat maps when we look at the enterprise business processes. And then the second half of the presentation roughly will be on the key value propositions, the use cases, and what it takes to be ready in order to move forward with good strategy and implementation of RPA initiatives. Let's start with a definition of robotic process automation. Number one, I guess I want to dispel any myths or rumors that RPA has to do with, physical robots. What we're really talking about here is computer software that has been programmed to mimic manual human task activities and, generally speaking, interaction with systems like enterprise systems, EPM systems, other data sources within your enterprise or outside of your organization, and with others along the way. For example, a robot will interact with other bots or will, in what some would call an attended bot fashion, interact with humans and other agents along the way. We'll talk more about that as we get into the presentation. And in order to kind of add some color to the definition, I also spoke with a few folks recently about what RPA means for them, and in their words, right, what does RPA mean to them and their organization? A few quotes here. One is, these bots work 24/7 if we need them to, a little different than our human workforce. Number two is, kind of using the metaphor of the human body, if you will. RPA and the bots are like a replacement for our employees, clicking and entering data, logging into systems. So they thought of them as the hands of their employees, especially for high volume administrative tasks. In addition, I thought this was an interesting one that is, oftentimes used in prioritization of use of RPA, and that is that sometimes we use RPA as a quick solution when traditional integration is not going to work for us. So there may be an opportunity to integrate information systems, but the cost or the time may be prohibitive, so we might use RPA as an interim solution. Another quote I got here is regarding data integration, playing off that last one. It's a quick way to go in through, if you will, the front end by having a bot log into an application and to help with data integration between systems when it may not make sense to use other solutions. I like the next quote too from one of our contacts here who said, look, it's just another tool for us in our process improvement toolkit. And what she went on to say is really, RPA isn't a silver bullet. There's no panacea. It's one of many tools that we like to have to help us as we're streamlining our processes and augmenting our employee workforce. And then finally, this one's a little more forward-looking, and I appreciate this in terms of its vision, if you will. Folks who have been implementing RPA would recognize that, it's not an end state, if you will. It's really putting in place kind of a backbone to what might be called the broader intelligent automation service offering. And we're going to talk more about that, but RPA does have its limitations. And put in place using other IA or intelligent automation makes it even more powerful. So there's a little bit of level setting around definitions. I'll also call it a couple of quotes here from, if you will, the business world. HBR in an article talks about the importance of not just thinking of bots on their own, but thinking of them as augmenting human employees and the concept of complementing human skill sets. I think it's a powerful idea, especially when you get beyond your first couple of bots. McKinsey, for example, has, this is an often quoted in the RPA world concept of saying that although fewer than 5% of occupations could be entirely automated, about 60% could be automated by at least 30%. So that means quite a bit of automation potential, according to McKinsey. And we're going to go on here to talk a little bit about, let's say, moving beyond that hype of automation. This is, on the left-hand side, a curve that some of you may be familiar with from the folks at Gartner Group. They call it the hype cycle. It's basically a demonstration of, let's say, the maturity of a technology or a solution or a concept as it moves through this original trigger of innovation through an inflation of hype, if you will, a peak of hype, and then through a trough of disillusionment until real results are being delivered. We have seen over the last couple of decades, if you will, artificial intelligence and other topics like that kind of come through this cycle. We believe RPA is really moving through that cycle rapidly, and as the folks from Gartner say, and I've highlighted that on the bottom here, the potential for ROI with RPA is very unique and especially dependent on each organization situation. So by that, what I mean to say is there isn't one answer where everybody should apply RPA in this particular situation. The next thing we want to talk about here is, as organizations are moving beyond this hype cycle and finding real value, how are they doing that? Well, they're frequently doing that as in using RPA as an enabler for their digital transformation strategies. Whether you have a digital transformation strategy or not isn't super critical, because you can still implement, RPA and intelligent automation without that broader strategy. But many organizations are choosing to position RPA and intelligent automation as one of the key enablers. For example, on the right-hand side, this is a framework we use at Huron. It's from our Insight group, our strategy consulting group focused on innovation. You see a few different panels in that in the graphic on the right-hand side. On the bottom, in gray, is usually the first focus for RPA is digitizing what might be considered core internal processes. And then up on the left-hand side, is more of a second step for many who are implementing RPA, digitizing the external stakeholder interaction, say with suppliers or customers. And then on the upper right, maybe a third phase or one that might be running in parallel is actually using RPA as part of a new business platform. We're going to focus mostly on digitizing the core processes, that first area. And the typical first focus for most folks we see getting into intelligent automation is RPA to help drive efficiency, to help drive productivity improvements, to help reduce error, to reduce risk. And in some cases where they believe that there is quite a bit of, let's say, replacement of human resource required, they may even reduce physical office assets, for example, or improve, their balance sheet in other ways by making efficient improvements in the supply chain and managing assets better as a result of using RPA. Let's talk a little bit about the growth of RPA. On the right-hand side, you see a graph which has on the left of that graph, U.S. dollars, and the first bar there is for 2017, the second is for 2022, and it shows what the Gartner Group is projecting as a 40% plus compound average growth rate for software sales. Well, that's kind of a surrogate for, interest level and implementation of intelligent automation and RPA in this case in particular. And, what Gartner or Forrester or others, including ourselves, would say is that there really are many opportunities to implement RPA, generally speaking, across any division or any function of an organization. One of the predictions from Gartner is that 60% of organizations that are billion-dollar-plus organizations will be implementing RPA by the end of 2018. We're going to ask you a polling question about this topic in just a minute as to what your current stage of RPA is, and that the adoption will certainly continue with organizations of all sizes. In addition, one of the key drivers of, let's say, leveraging RPA is the legacy systems and challenges with, quick, timely, efficient, low-cost integration. And RPA will certainly continue, again here according to Gartner, to grow over the next few years, in part because of some of the encumbrances of those legacy systems. When we think of the tool vendors, and we're not necessarily getting into an evaluation of tool vendors here on this presentation today, but what you would see if you analyze the evolution of the functionality and the competencies of those tool vendors is that they are really expanding their functionality beyond what you might call basic process automation into what might be called the more intelligent optical character recognition, intake, use of tools like process mining, business process management, and other AI solutions. So this is a fairly dynamic marketplace for the tool vendors, and the applications of RPA and IA are growing as they move up the spectrum, if you will, of intelligent automation. And interestingly here, I think, and probably very relevant to the audience we have today, is that according to Gartner again, almost all of new RPA clients or customers who are using the software and the solutions and implementing intelligent automation are coming from business buyers outside the IT organization. It's not to say that RPA can be done on its own without IT, but it sure is much more easily implemented than some IT solutions might be. We'll talk more about the collaboration between business and IT as we go forward. I want to offer up here RPA as it's positioned in what might be considered the intelligent automation spectrum here. On the left-hand side of the spectrum, we've got traditional automation. Think of that as simple batch scripting and mapping and data loading and that sort of thing that we would have done for years. On the right-hand side of the spectrum, think of what would be considered more cognitive automation. In this case, automation that is really demonstrating a way of, let's say, judgment or adaption, human critical thinking, something that is really beyond simple rote process automation. Examples here might be, processing natural language, so whatever language it happens to be, in an email, in a text message, on a tweet or other social media type of event, on an invoice, in a PDF file, etc. But the ability to process that and make sense out of it, or maybe generating sensible communications or emails, or perhaps another example is more sophisticated machine learning. This is the right-hand side of the more advanced end of the spectrum, and RPA fits in the middle, more or less in the center of the spectrum, where RPA is focused on mimicking logical, repetitive user activity like clicking and logging in and executing transactions in systems. More often than not, reading more structured data, but also some unstructured documents and data along the way as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the reason I put the spectrum out is on the next page, we're going to drill down and talk about some of the technology enablers across that spectrum. So here, like we just showed on the previous page, we've got the traditional, if you will, on the right, cognitive automation on the left, and RPA down the middle. And I want to suggest a few of the technology enablers. It's a little bit of a busy slide, and I apologize for that, but I think it's illustrative here of the many technology enablers that are often combined together to produce a highly productive, efficient, high-value automation solution. And here what we see in the center, if you will, is RPA and RPA suites. And as we mentioned earlier, they're expanding in their capabilities. It's very common that RPA could use the technologies you see on the left, like some of that, the traditional ETL tool sets or other automation from your enterprise performance management or ERP or CRM solutions, etc. And it's also common that they would be, let's say, integrated or able to call more sophisticated automation tools like predictive analytics tools, like being called by or integrated with chatbots that you might see when you're logging in and using an online service, being triggered by Internet of Things transactions and intelligent sensors that are out there, being integrated with, as I mentioned earlier, natural language processing or possibly artificial vision or other more sophisticated tools. So RPA is powerful on its own and even more powerful when it is combined with other technologies on the spectrum. And that brings us, if you will, with that bit of background and overview to our first polling question. We wanted to learn a little more about you, where you're at. And Jess, you might want to help us out here, and then I'll use some of that background that we get from the polling to help drive where I focus the next portion of our presentation. Jess?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. As Mark just mentioned, this is our first polling question of the day. This one says, which of the following best describes your current status with respect to RPA? We'll ask that you please select one answer option here. The answer options are planning, We are investigating automation use cases, options, and priorities. Initiating, we are conducting proof of concepts and pilots. Expanding foundation, we have established mature RPA capabilities and governments or centers of excellence. Institutionalizing, we have successfully deployed limited intelligent automation or artificial intelligence in addition to RPA. Or leading, we are applying advanced intelligent automation and artificial intelligence in addition to RPA. We'll ask that you please take a few more moments to select your answer. Friendly reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer at least 3 of the polling questions that we'll have today. We'll leave this question up for just a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. And then once we close this question down, we'll share the results and have Mark make a few comments before moving on. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what we'll do now is go ahead and take a look at the results. Mark, here they are. I'll turn things back over to you.
Thank you very much, Jess. Okay, it looks like the majority of us are investigating the opportunities, but quite a few who are also conducting POCs and well into that, with a few of them who are building out their center of excellence and expanding their capabilities. I guess this is more or less what we might expect, given the theme of this is about an introduction, if you will, to RPA and how to drive value from it. So what I'm hoping we will be able to do here as we move on through the next pages is to appeal to the whole group, and I think we've got something in the next upcoming pages for each of you, each of the groups here that we see listed. So thank you very much for that background. You know, we're often asked about what the architecture of an RPA solution might look like, because folks want to figure, into their plans what might be fair game, what might be possible. And I'm going to talk about specific use cases later, but I want to use this page as an illustration of what we would call the high-level architecture. And in terms of some of the terminology that we use the term attended bots or unattended bots to indicate whether a robot, whether the software is actually running and then in interaction with a human. That would be an attended bot. Or an unattended bot is one that might be running, as needed, when needed, but not require any type of human interaction. Okay, so you hear me refer to those along the way. And here, what I'm going to paint is a picture of essentially like a 3-level architecture. In this case, I'm using UiPath as an example. You see the logo on the right-hand side. That's one of the leading application RPA, application solutions providers. And UiPath is a leader, in some of the terminology I'm going to use here is a little bit specific to UiPath, but we could be talking about other solutions as well. On the top layer of the architecture, there's a portion of the architecture which is generally used to schedule and orchestrate all of the activities of the bot. So let's think of this in terms of a manager, managing a bot force, scheduling that, controlling it when bots would launch or not launch, let's say, logging activities and results, reporting, and managing assets. For example, there are bots or portions of the code for bots that might be reusable, and you might keep those in a library, often used for a good opportunity to get leverage from chunks of code, if you will, so that they can be used across bots or applications. The second layer there is called the studio, and that's where the bots are developed. This is like, you think of a business user or maybe a more technical person actually writing the code, if you will, in somewhat in business terms, according to a process flow. So you see a little process flow in the center of the page there. If we can articulate what the process looks like with a well-formed process flow of yes or no kinds of decisions and actions, then it could probably, be developed into a bot. And then those bots are able to log in and access applications or data within the enterprise. So the third layer here is, think of a human logging into SAP or Oracle or Hyperion or Excel, using Excel, or possibly going into a database that the bot would have access to, right? This is the same kind of thing. A bot can log in and execute transactions the same way that a human could. In addition, if we think of extending that on the third layer, we can also reach outside the enterprise. So to any of the solutions or applications that might not reside within your organization, as long as security and access is provided, the bots can reach outside the organization, log in, bring data back, etc. So that's the architecture. And as I move to the next page, I just want you to think about this small image in the middle, which is basically representing workflow and a process map, if you will. And if you can develop a process map that is, let's call it Boolean with yes or no logic rather than probabilistic maybe or, probabilistic kind of ratios and thinking there, it's probably, a candidate. And what we've got on this page and the next page is what we call a heat map. So where is it that bots might have their greatest applicability, right? So think of those process flows that you may have in these enterprise process areas like record to report or procure to pay or contract to cash, etc. And what we've done here is we've basically laid out what you might call sub-processes or activity groups, and what you see in the color coding here is where, generally speaking, we've found there to be higher opportunities to drive value using RPA. You can see some under record to report, like the financial, close and reporting activities, some compliance activities, data management, for example, and others across across our heat map here. And then in amber, you've got, I guess you might call it the next level of potential, and then there's the rest. What we're not trying to say is this is absolutely true for your organization, but what we're trying to say is based on organizations we've worked with and experience of others, these are generally areas that are ripe for RPA and automation. I'm going to talk about a few of those specifics later in the presentation. And then if you happen to be in the healthcare area, here's another version of a heat map. This is one that, for example, we assisted a client in developing in what is called their healthcare revenue cycle, and we've color-coded it here. So this is the type of thing that your organization may want to put together, not necessarily looking exactly like this, but something that indicates here's our business processes, here are the areas that we think are the highest opportunity for us. Some of those indicators, for example, might be, as I said earlier, you can write a simple process diagram that describes the process and the exceptions. Another indicator might be it's relatively high volume, so there might be a good level of amount of value. Could be considered more of an administrative activity. Again, other indicators that help us determine what might be higher priority. And we do have a few white papers out there in the area of healthcare and insurance industry applications. If that's something of interest to you, feel free to let us know. With that, I'm going to start the transition into the second half of the presentation here and talk a little more about the value proposition, use cases, and what it means to get ready and get things started and help us move beyond those first couple of buckets as we saw in the first polling question, moving a little bit further along. So on this page, basically what we're saying is that RPA solutions are relevant to pretty much all industries and functional areas. There are some areas, as I mentioned with the heat maps, that they're a little more specifically applied more frequently than others. But in order for us to dig in and talk about some of those use cases, I'd like to conduct another polling question to learn a little bit more about you and your profile and your priorities. Actually, we're going to have two questions, and I'll turn it back to you, Jess, if you don't mind, to get a little more information to help us focus our next few page presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mark. As Mark just said, this is our second polling question of the day. This one says, within what time frame does your organization intend to introduce RPA? The answer options for this question are: we began RPA initiatives prior to 2018, this year, next year, not yet scheduled, or I don't know. We'll ask that you please take a few moments to select your answer. Again, friendly reminder for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer at least 3 of our polling questions. This is our second one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. Once we close this question down, we'll share the results and have Mark make a few comments before we go ahead and launch polling question number 3. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what we'll do now is go ahead and share the results. Mark, here they are. I'll turn things back over to you.
Okay. So I guess looking at the results, this wouldn't surprise us as much, knowing what we know from the previous polling question, that many are not yet scheduled, but are considering, what it is that over half not yet scheduled or not sure exactly when, but considering what the potential value is for RPA. And what I'm really hoping is that as we talk through some of the next few pages, what we'll be able to do is help you begin to structure what it is that you need to do to initiate or expand, from your initial steps, and give you some inspiration in terms of where others have, driven some good value from RPA. For the folks who, almost 20% who started prior to 2018, I'm especially interested, in learning more as we can learn on the next polling question about where your results are coming from or where you're anticipating them to come from. So let's go on to the next, if you don't mind, Jess, next polling question.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and launch that now. As Mark just said, this is our third polling question of the day. This one says, which of the following represents your organization's expectations regarding the value of RPA? Please note that we'll ask that you please select as many as apply. For this question, please keep in mind, for us, RPA has or will augment our human workforce and improve productivity, allow us to reallocate staff to higher value-added analytic work, postpone hiring or lead to a reduction in workforce as bots replace our staff, eliminate errors and improve quality of our business processes, improve timely compliance and regulatory reporting, improve our supply chain efficiency, improve our customers' experience, improve work satisfaction and engagement for our employees, or drive top-line sales improvements. Please take a few moments to select your answers. This question is multi-select, so again, we'll ask that you please select all that apply. You can scroll down to view all answer options and then click on the Submit button to record your answer. Friendly reminder again, this is our third polling question of the day. Again, we'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. And again, once we close this question down, we'll share the results and have Mark make a few comments before moving on. Also, friendly reminder to all of our attendees, I've seen a couple attendee questions come in. Please continue to submit your questions for Mark. And again, we'll save some time towards the end to pose those questions out. All right, Mark, what we'll do now without further ado is go ahead and share the results here. Again, I know we have quite a few answer options, so I'll give you a quick second to take a look through these and share some comments.
Thank you very much. Let me just take a look at what we've got here. Digesting the feedback. Very good. Yeah, it seems as though, not surprise to anybody, that efficiency and productivity increases are expected, that there's an anticipated increase in quality of the business process by reducing errors. Those are the types of items that we mentioned earlier in the presentation are generally the first focus. No surprise there. I think what you may learn over time is that quite a few folks are also using bots either as periodic or one-time tools to help with compliance measures. So, and it might just be reporting preparation or doing some research. So that's an area that we might want to look out and see what the opportunities are. And then in terms of the lower ranked items like improving the supply chain efficiency, doesn't surprise me at this point that one's lower. As we said earlier, it tends to be a second focus for many folks. Doesn't mean it's not important or can't drive value, but we tend to focus internally first before looking across the whole supply chain. And then for that item that is the lowest on our response rate here, I guess I'm a little surprised that one's as low as it's been rated today because, oftentimes bots are not, let's say, deployed with an intent of reducing staff, but they are often freeing up at least fractional FTEs, which would allow organizations over time to perhaps delay a hiring decision, or instead of, let's just say, a hiring order board for 10 people might be reduced, to a lower number of potential hires because of the anticipated use of automation. So, given that a lot of folks haven't actually launched their initiatives yet, or are still trying to figure out when they might launch them, I guess that's part of the rationale this is lower here. But over time, I would expect that particular response rate to jump up if we did another polling in the upcoming months. So thanks for your feedback on that. That also helps me think through how we can emphasize a few key points in the latter part of this presentation. We're often asked, how is it that we should get started, or now that we're started, what are the logical next steps on our journey? What's important for us to think about in our broader roadmap? What should we be planning for? And this page is intended to help set that to answer that question and help set some goals and put the plans into context. So usually, when organizations are getting started with the core processes, as we talked about earlier, and you validated on that last polling question, one of the topics that the business side of the team is addressing with IT is around security. So don't underestimate the need to, let's say, work with the appropriate information security folks or IT authorities to address security. For example, in the area of bots logging into applications, internal applications or internal data sources, as well as external applications and data sources. During the, let's say, first step, the initiation phase, if you will, it's very important to engage those folks you might consider potential change agents who would positively, impact and embrace the opportunity for automation, and subject matter experts, because the subject matter experts in the process area are the ones who will be, let's say, supportive of, development of the process flow, understanding what the exceptions are, making sure that, the process is practical and will indeed, perform as it's expected. We often see folks getting started with a mix of both internal and external resources because there isn't, at this point, like a mature, robust internal competency. So using external resources for at least a period of time to help build skills and competencies and comfort level with the technology and the solutions and the processes is pretty common. This is also the time when folks are beginning to develop their roadmap and their plans and clarify the order of magnitude of what initiatives ought to be on there, what kind of investment might need to be made in order for us to move beyond the initial POC. If you will, stepping up a little bit and expanding, we see, let's say, a formalization of a center of excellence and an establishment of a fundamental set of skills, mostly from the business side, but also from the IT side, to be able to identify and prioritize which RPA opportunities might deliver the most value. In addition, we see, let's say, an enhancement of the current deployed bot force. There are some things that worked well when we initiated, if you will, and got started, but we also recognize and learn that there's some things we could do a little better. So there's enhancement of those routines and an expanded set of what might be considered, exception management. As we'll talk about later, it's important to understand the business process as well as the exceptions, and so that the bots can deal with those or know when to kick those out for human intervention. In addition, as organizations are expanding, they are figuring out how to commit to a level of investment, in their plans for 2019, or committing to a level of performance improvement or integrating objectives into their their leadership's goals and plans. In addition, we also see a nice, let's say, maturing of perspective and competency around maintenance and support. Just like humans require, if you will, some guidance and coaching and professional development, bots also require maintenance and support and, as we said earlier, enhancements. And then finally, I'll just mention when refining the roadmap, the focus is often placed on leveraging intelligent automation technologies like we talked about on the spectrum earlier, as well as expanding, as you validated, I think, on the previous polling question, expanding to those external-facing processes and not just internal core processes. And then the final step here is what we called it institutionalization, building out that center of excellence, understanding what's important to us from an enterprise governance perspective, and how it is that we should be funding the development and accounting for the results, actually measuring the tangible results here. And then enhancing our ability to, let's say, manage the bot force. And by that I mean, I put in the phrase here, hire to retire, right? Think of, prioritizing which bots need to be built, kind of the hiring decision, and then which bots need to be enhanced, call it the professional development. And then, eventually bots are no longer needed, and then, there's kind of a retirement process. And at the same time, what we see is there's an adjustment to our organization's, hiring models. The type of folks that they're hiring into the organization may be a little more sophisticated, let's say in the data sciences area or specific automation technologies, or developing people, again, to do a great job with their process and automation implementations, and maybe even reducing, as I said earlier, some of the certain types of administrative headcount for the future. And along with this comes, the scaling, if you will, across the organization with additional intelligent automation or artificial intelligence technologies. So now let's get into, the topics we were talking about earlier, like, typical use cases. And the main message on this page is that there isn't, let's say, one right answer as to where to start. There's no one appropriate use case to begin with, or focal point for an initiative. But I wanted to give you a few examples. In the first row, we've worked with some health systems who were focused more on, let's prioritize what the use case opportunities might be for us. Let's develop a roadmap first before we get too far down, in the weeds with actually developing bots. Let's figure out what we should do, and let's test the waters with a few proofs of concept before we do any major rollouts. And in this case, the focus was on, what's important in many of these organizations is optimizing their revenue cycle, because there are a lot of administrative high-volume activity there that can be automated, and improving their supply chain, improving internal audit, improving, if you will, freeing up time to improve care for their patients. And then development of COE and putting governance in place. Whereas on the second example there, there was an added focus on compliance reporting for that particular university, a very important hot topic for them where bots could be used. On the next one, you see an example focused. This is an industrial company focused more on efficient financial close and reporting processes, trying to, if you will, shrink the cycle and also free up resources to do higher value-added activities like analysis rather than the admin work, if you will. The next one is an example of focus on shared services, optimizing shared services in the finance function, and also testing and developing some supply chain automation opportunities to reduce inventory in the supply chain and provide better customer service for some of their customers. This is an interesting case because they chose both to look at internal core processes as well as a limited set of external processes as part of the same initiative up front. They didn't wait, if you will, to look outside. And then finally, other examples in other industries like energy and utilities, where data management was critical, and they were particularly interested in making sure that they had high quality metadata and other master data management, and then moving into the area of journal entries and automating journal entries. So as I said, there's no one right way to approach this or prioritize. It kind of depends on your organization and what's important for you. And on the next 2 pages here, we've got some additional use cases, and I've mentioned some of these concepts here, but let's talk a little bit more about the kind of return on investment or value that can come from this. In the first one there, this is a financial close example where one of the key outcomes was that finance systems folks didn't need to work as many off hours assignments, because the bots were able to pick up for and begin to automate that financial close cycle, especially during the off hours. This is, this drives, if you will, the ability to reallocate the staff to higher value analytic activities, or just reduce those overtime hours and bring a higher quality of work experience for folks there. As I said on the previous page, this next example here is use of bots to automate metadata and data management, and where other systems weren't appropriate for them, they could use a bot to help make sure that they had consistency across all of their reporting hierarchies, for example. There are plenty of others here that are, I think, relevant to the finance area. You see on this page around, even system testing and compliance. I'm going to be sensitive to time because we're going to run short on Q&A if I don't move on. But you get the idea that there are plenty of use cases here in the finance area. It's also typical, that RPA and automation is used for processing customer invoices or supplier invoices. Here's some examples, many of which on this page are related to the broader supply chain or HR area, where process cycle time reduction can range from let's say at least 50% up to 90% and 90% plus in most cases, and where risk of error from manual data entry is also reduced or completely eliminated through the use of bots. So here you see quite a few use cases where reallocation of staff, or at least avoiding hiring can be possible. It doesn't mean that there are going to be layoffs, and it doesn't mean that you're going to have to reduce staff in the future. It's maybe just an opportunity to redeploy them onto higher value activities, but at least it's noteworthy to say that the option is there depending on what's important for your organization. So quite a few examples here, including goods receiving, goods returns, customer data management, and onboarding new employees. With that, I'm going to cruise through a couple of pages here that are geared more towards getting started. As many of you had said that there were plans for 2019. What will we need to do to prepare for success? To implement or to expand where we're at. This is an example of a tool where you've got some key factors on the left-hand side here. It's actually an Excel workbook. You can imagine what that would look like. And these are called, in our methodology, readiness factors for automation. And basically, it's important to go up, if you will, across both functional and tactical and technical and broader strategic factors to see where you're at and where you need to be. You can see, for example, we often find that processes aren't ready for automation. If it's a poor process, that it may make sense to spend time streamlining that process before automating it. So process readiness is an important factor in being successful with RPA. In addition, collaborating, with IT and the business side to understand what application access and security and data security requirements might be needed, very important. So if you consider these readiness factors as, you launch RPA initiatives or as you're, preparing the next wave of RPA bot deployment, these are the kinds of questions that can help, get you ahead of the curve, if you will. And then I'm getting close to the end. I just have 2 more pages here, and then we can go into Q&A. One is we're often asked about what should we do to set up our Center of Excellence, and here are some of the key considerations, like making sure we have clarity around what's in scope, right? What's not in scope for the COE? What kind of governance is required? What kind of communications are required? What does the intake process look like so that we know, who can suggest automations, who will be the authority on prioritizing and putting a value or a cost, to those automations, and then deciding, which RPA initiatives would, be tackled first versus later. And second, this focus on, the organization structure. And I'll just introduce the fact that there are 3, general scenarios: a highly centralized type of COE, driven from the center top down and pushing out guidance and requirements and, essentially owning the staff, and then on the other end of the spectrum, a more decentralized model depending on, your business unit's capability, your geographic capability, how it is that you would like to staff, et cetera. And then there's the more hybrid or federated model in the middle there. So lots of options on, the COE structure that one could discuss. In addition, COE is often tasked with developing the education and training and developing knowledge transfer plans to get folks up to speed on what is RPA, what are the intelligent automation tools, and how do we decide whether RPA is appropriate or not, and who can do the development, maintenance, and support there. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, let's not forget about the importance of security and allocating appropriate permissions to bots, and considering that vis-a-vis what we would normally do for human users. I'm going to move on here to talk on the final slide here before we go to Q&A about more than just the COE, but a broader set of factors for putting your automation strategy in place. On the right-hand side, you see a nice graphic, I think, representing some of the key elements of a good automation strategy, which would include RPA or some of the other IA that we talked about earlier. And I want to talk through the importance of a few particular items here, like the role of an executive, a leader, a senior manager in establishing clarity around what is our vision for using automation. What are some of the guiding principles for automation? For example, many organizations are very clear on the fact that if integration, technical integration exists, it's better to use that integration before we develop RPA and lay that on top of a solution, because the integration may provide all that we need. Or other guiding principles might be, look, the payback has got to be significant for us. We're not going to just automate because we can, but we're going to put some kind of business case around this, and we're going to use these principles to evaluate the value of that business case. Similarly here, many organizations find it very helpful to have a plan in a multi-year roadmap, if you will, with clear goals, numeric and qualitative and quantitative goals. What is it that we're going to deliver when? To what degree should this be financially, let's say, motivated and driven versus other qualitative factors? To what degree should our governance be cross-functional? And usually the answer is, of course, it needs to be. And here's what the roles are for business versus our IT colleagues. Here's what the roles are for what might be considered more of a corporate function versus more of a BU function, or a functional leadership role. And governance can take many forms there. And then finally, want to address the need, as I've mentioned once or twice before, that it's important to choose the right processes, and the automation strategy needs to incorporate a way to prioritize, streamline processes, and good exception management. Because if there are many exceptions to a process, it may not be a good candidate, for RPA. Or if there are many exceptions, I should say, and we cannot, codify them, it may not be a good candidate. If they can be codified, then it might be a great candidate because it could actually drive efficiency through, quick automation, timely automation, efficient automation of those exception management steps in the process, like we illustrated earlier. And then, as I said earlier, RPA isn't always the solution, right? So the strategy needs to clarify which technologies are we using, and what are the roles of those technologies. Maybe we should be using some of the traditional ETL and built-in applications that exist in our ERP or EPM solutions now, and we don't need RPA. Or maybe we should be using more advanced IA rather than just simply RPA on its own. And I don't want to underestimate the importance of data and data quality. Without good underlying data quality and methods to maintain it, it will be very difficult for those bots to execute. And finally, in wrapping up, as I said at the very beginning of the presentation, it's important to find the right folks and engage them early in the process so that the strategy isn't just a concept, but it's something that is implementable and embraced by folks who are part of the workforce. It's an exciting opportunity, and what we see is many organizations are using it to re-energize folks' career paths and re-energize, if you will, their recruiting and professional development. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jess, for questions. I think we only have a few minutes, but maybe we can squeeze a couple in our final polling question after that.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Mark, for your great insights, examples that you shared today. I thought it was a really excellent session. We have had quite a few attendee questions come in. So let's start with this one here. This attendee writes, Mark, what is your impression around how the RPA vendor landscape will change as we move along the hype curve? Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, very good question. I think the macro level answer to that is that there will be consolidation in the RPA vendor landscape. There are many players out there now, probably 20 viable, if you will, players plus. There are a few leaders. It is a bit of a land grab right now, by the leaders who are ramping up their sales forces and ramping up their strategic partnerships and ramping up, let's say, in terms of being aggressive in their pricing. I think the consolidation will occur because, some of those laggers will be, acquired. And in other cases, some of the RPA vendors will be acquired by larger players where, let's say a large-scale ERP in a few years will have RPA baked into it as a critical component and part of the solution that they don't have there today. So we'll see quite a bit of consolidation, I would say, over the next 3 to 6 years.
Excellent. I think maybe we could just squeeze one last one in here. This attendee writes, can finance develop and deploy RPA with limited or no support from IT?
Good question as well. We see most of the RPA initiatives being led and driven by the business functions like finance, and at least getting things started. The most productive use of intelligent automation and RPA does come from a collaboration with the IT group. For example, making sure that the infrastructure can handle what's needed for the automations. For example, making sure that appropriate methodologies are followed, documentation is followed, and that the bots are not only developed, but that they're easily maintained. As I said earlier, kind of think hire to retire in terms of bots, and some of that maintenance work could be done by the business or possibly by IT. And the final note on this one is that, generally speaking, security and information and data security is a hot topic that's jointly tackled by the business and IT. Back to you, Jessica.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. And before we close out today's webcast, we'll now launch our fourth and final polling question. This is around the white paper that I mentioned at the beginning of today's webcast. So this one says, please indicate if you would like to receive a copy of our CFO Argyle white paper with Huron, Beyond Hype, the value of RPA. The answer options are yes, please send to me, or no thanks. Just take a quick second to select your answer here. This is our fourth and final question. And to be conscious of everyone's time, we will not be displaying the results for this section, but please rest assured if you do select yes, Huron will be making sure you do receive your copy. So please go ahead and select your final answer here. And what we'll do now is move on. We just want to say, of course, a big thank you again to you, Mark. For those attendees who are interested in contacting Mark or Huron for some additional follow-up related to today's content, you can find some contact information on this slide here. Again, a big thank you to Mark for a great session today. And of course, a big thank you to all of our attendees for joining us for From Hype to Value, Robotic Process Automation. We hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.